The bag landed on his bed before the sun had finished rising over the cul-de-sac. It was a thick industrial trash bag, the kind men use for hauling yard waste, black as a wet road in November. Harlan Marsden stood in the doorway with his arms folded across his chest, and he didn't speak right away. He let the silence do the work first. He had always been good at that, at letting silence carry the weight of a thing he didn't want to say out loud. Adeline Holloway was already awake. She had been awake since 4 a.m, lying on her back in the narrow bed she had slept in for 11 years, watching the ceiling fan turn slow circles above her. She had known this day was coming. She had known it the way a deer knows winter is coming, in the bones in the quiet, in the way a man counts down to a thing he is looking forward to. Harlan had been counting down. She had seen the calendar in his workshop 2 months ago when she went out to look for her bicycle pump. There was a date circled in red marker, her 18th birthday, and above the circle in his small, cramped handwriting, 2 words: Freedom Day. She had stood there in the workshop for a long minute holding the pump, and she had felt something inside her chest go cold and still. She had not told her mother. There was no point in telling her mother anything anymore. Her mother had been gone for a long time, even when she was sitting at the kitchen table. So when the bag landed on the bed at 6:53 in the morning, the day after her 18th birthday, Adeline did not flinch. She did not turn her head. She kept looking at the ceiling fan. "Just clothes and personal items," Harlan said. "Leave the furniture. The furniture stays." She did not answer. "You've got until noon." Then he walked away, his slippers whispering down the hallway toward the kitchen, where the coffee maker was already gurgling, and Adeline lay there for another full minute before she sat up. She did not cry. She had used up her crying a long time ago on smaller things. On a birthday party Harlan refused to let her have when she was 12. On a school trip to Washington, he wouldn't sign the permission slip for when she was 14, on 1,000 small refusals that had hollowed her out by inches until there was nothing left to cry with. She packed. It did not take long. 2 pairs of jeans, both worn thin at the knees, 4 shirts, a handful of underwear and socks, her toothbrush, the Wendy's uniform she still wore 4 nights a week for 12 hours of pay, a hairbrush, a small canvas bag of toiletries, and from the top drawer of her nightstand, wrapped in a square of clean dish towel, the only thing in the room that had ever truly belonged to her, a photograph. It was creased at the corners and faded around the edges, and it showed a young man, 24 years old, sitting on a couch with a baby in a yellow blanket cradled against his chest. The young man was looking down at the baby with an expression Adeline had spent 15 years trying to memorize. On the back in pencil in handwriting, she had never seen alive someone had written Calvin and Addie first week home. Calvin Holloway, her father. He had died when she was 3. A construction accident. That was all her mother had ever said about it. That was all anyone had ever said about it. She slid the photograph into the front pocket of her duffel bag, the one spot where it wouldn't get bent, and she pulled the zipper shut. She walked down the stairs in her sneakers, carrying the duffel bag over one shoulder and the black garbage bag in her other hand, because she had no other suitcase, and she stopped at the bottom of the stairs and stood in the doorway of the kitchen. Her mother was at the sink. Beverly Marsden was 42 years old, and she had once been beautiful. There was a photograph somewhere in the house in a drawer Adeline had stopped opening, that showed her mother at 23, laughing at something Calvin had said. Her head tipped back. Her hair caught mid-toss in the sunlight. The woman in that photograph was gone. The woman at the sink now had thin shoulders and graying hair pulled back in a tight knot, and she was washing a pan that was already clean. She was washing it slowly, round and round in the soapy water, the same circles over and over. She did not turn around. "Mom." The sponge kept moving. "Mom, look at me." Beverly turned off the water. She dried her hands on a dish towel, slowly taking more time than she needed, and when she finally turned around, she looked at Adeline for about a second before her eyes shifted down to the floor and stayed there. "You'll be fine," Beverly said. "You're an adult now. I have $34. You have a job." "I have a part-time job, Mom. They give me 12 hours a week." Beverly folded the dish towel. She set it on the counter. She picked it up and folded it again. Her mouth was a thin line, and her eyes were red at the edges, but her voice came out flat and dry, as if she were reading off a card someone had handed her. "Harlan's right," she said. "It's time." And what Adeline saw in her mother's face in that moment was not cruelty. It was not anger. It was something far worse. It was relief. The kind of relief a woman feels when a hard thing she has been carrying for a very long time is finally about to be set down. Adeline did not say goodbye. She turned and walked through the living room past the couch, where she had done 11 years of homework, past the television Harlan watched every night, while she stood in the kitchen and ate her dinner from a paper plate. She opened the front door. She pulled it shut behind her with a soft final click. Her car sat at the curb, a 2004 Honda Civic she had bought 8 months earlier, with $300 of saved Wendy's money and a $500 loan from her manager that she had paid back in installments of $50 a paycheck. The check engine light had been on for 3 months. The passenger window did not close all the way at the top, leaving a finger-wide gap that let in rain and cold air and the smell of whatever street she was parked on. She threw the duffel bag into the back seat. She set the garbage bag beside it. She slid behind the wheel. She sat there for a long time before she could make herself turn the key. She looked at the house. She looked at the upstairs window where her bedroom had been. She looked at the kitchen window where her mother was probably still standing at the sink, washing a pan that did not need to be washed, and she understood with a clarity that frightened her that she would not be coming back. Not for visits, not for holidays, not ever. She turned the key. The engine coughed twice and caught. She drove away from the only home she had ever known, and she did not look in the rearview mirror because there was nothing back there worth looking at. The first night she parked at a Walmart on the edge of town. She had pulled in at dusk into the row farthest from the building behind a long line of campers and box trucks, where she hoped nobody would notice a single Honda Civic with a girl inside it. She leaned the driver's seat back as far as it would go. She balled up an old sweatshirt and pushed it against the window for a pillow. She pulled her jacket over her like a blanket. She did not sleep. She woke up 4 separate times, though she could not remember falling asleep in between. The first time a diesel truck idled in the next row over the cab, vibrating the engine, grumbling in the dark. The second time, footsteps came down the row of parked cars slow and even, and stopped beside her driver's side door. She lay perfectly still with her eyes closed and her hand under the sweatshirt, gripping her car keys, in case she needed to start the engine and drive. After a minute, the footsteps moved on. The third time, somebody 2 cars over was trying door handles. She heard the soft metallic click of a handle being lifted, and let go again a man, moving down the row, testing each car as if he were window shopping. He did not try hers. He moved on toward the end of the row and disappeared. The fourth time, she woke up for no reason at all and just lay there, staring at the gray ceiling of the Civic until the sky outside turned the color of dirty milk and the sun came up. She bought a coffee at the McDonald's across the parking lot for $1.19. She sat in the booth as long as they would let her. She used their bathroom to brush her teeth. She washed her face in the sink and dried it with rough brown paper towels, and looked at herself in the mirror, and she did not recognize the girl looking back. She drove. She had no plan, so she drove. She filled the tank for $9 at a Sunoco off the interstate and ate a cheeseburger from the dollar menu sitting on the hood of the Civic and watched a hawk circle high above an empty field. The second night, she parked behind a closed lumber yard because it was raining and she didn't want to sit in a Walmart parking lot in the rain. She listened to the rain on the roof for a long time. She thought about her mother. She thought about Calvin Holloway holding a baby in a yellow blanket. She thought about all the things she did not know about her own life, all the questions she had been told not to ask. And she fell asleep with her hand on the photograph in the front pocket of her duffel bag. The third night, she parked at a rest stop on the interstate under a row of tall pines that swayed in the wind. The bathrooms were open all night, and there was a coffee machine that took quarters. She drank a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard, and she sat on a wooden picnic bench in the cold dark. And she did something she had not done since she was a child. She prayed. She had not been raised on prayer. Her mother had stopped going to church the year Calvin died, and Harlan called religion a tax on stupid people. And so Adeline had grown up in a house where the name of God was never spoken, except as a curse. But she had a vague memory, very faint, of a woman holding her in a wooden pew somewhere when she was small, and the smell of lemon furniture polish and a man's voice rising and falling above her head. She did not know whose memory that was. She did not know if it was even hers. But on the third night at the rest stop, she closed her eyes and she whispered into the cold dark. "If there's anybody out there," she said, "I could use some help." That was all. She did not know what else to ask for. She finished the coffee. She went back to the car. She slept 4 hours straight, without waking the longest stretch of sleep she had managed in 72 hours. And when she woke up, the sun was on her face, and her phone was vibrating on the passenger seat. A number she did not recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. She had never let a number she did not recognize go to voicemail in her life. But she was tired, and she was hungry, and she did not have the energy to pretend she was someone who had her life together. Then, on the fourth ring, she picked up. "Miss Holloway." The voice on the other end was a man's voice, older, careful with the slow vowels of a person who has lived in cold country all his life. "This is Edwin Hartwell from Hartwell and Stone Attorneys at Law. I'm calling regarding the estate of Wendell Holloway." She closed her eyes against the morning light. "My grandfather died a long time ago." There was a pause on the line. Then the voice came back gentler than before, as if it were laying something heavy down on a soft surface so it would not break. "Miss Holloway, your grandfather, Wendell Holloway, passed away 6 months ago on the 14th of October. He was 76 years old. He lived in a town called Briar Creek, about 5 hours north of your listed address, and he named you as the sole beneficiary of his estate. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ear. "That's not possible," she said. "My mother told me he died before I was born." "I can assure you, Miss Holloway, he was alive until last October. He came to my office every spring to update his will. Every spring for 15 years. The voice paused. "He always asked the same question when he came in. He asked whether I had been able to find you." Adeline could not speak. She held the phone against her ear, and she stared through the windshield at the pine trees moving in the wind, and she felt something shift inside her chest, a wall she had been leaning against her entire life that was suddenly silently not there anymore. "What did he leave me?" she finally said. "A cabin," the lawyer answered. "He built it himself from what I understand. The property is paid in full. No liens, no outstanding taxes. He made sure of that. He also left certain personal effects that he asked me to keep at his property rather than in my office." Edwin Hartwell gave her the address. He gave her the name of the road, the directions from the highway, the location of the key under a brick beside the porch. He told her his office was on the main street of Briar Creek, across from the post office, and that he had been trying to reach her for months. "The phone number we had on file was disconnected," he said. "I sent letters to your mother's address. None of them were ever answered." She thanked him, and she hung up and she sat there for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the trees. And then she got out of the car and walked into the little gas station next to the rest stop. She bought a Vermont state map for $2.99 because the GPS on her phone was almost out of data for the month. She unfolded it on the hood of the Civic in the cold morning light. Briar Creek was up north, way up north, almost to the Canadian border in the green-shaded country, where the roads turned thin and twisty, and the towns were too small to print the names in full. She drove 3 more hours that day to make her gas last. She stopped at a used bookstore in a strip mall, in some town she would never remember, and she sold 3 textbooks she had kept from high school. The man behind the counter, an older fellow with white whiskers and a careful way of handling the books, gave her $18 for the lot. He looked at her over the top of his glasses for a long moment. "You all right, miss?" "Yes, sir." He looked at her for another moment, and then he reached behind the counter, and he handed her a granola bar without saying a word, and she took it, and she thanked him, and she walked back out to the Civic, and she ate the granola bar standing in the parking lot, watching a pickup truck go by with a black Labrador in the bed, its ears flapping in the wind. She drove north. The suburbs gave way to strip malls, and the strip malls gave way to farmland, and the farmland gave way to trees, and the trees got taller and darker and closer together as the road climbed up into the foothills of Vermont. The 2-lane highway followed a river for a long while, the water slate gray and moving fast over rocks. And she rolled her window down despite the cold, because she wanted to smell the air. It smelled like cut hay and wood smoke, and the cold mineral breath of a creek running through stone. She passed a sign that said, Briar Creek population 830-something. The last digit had faded past reading. The road dipped down into a narrow valley, where the trees opened up onto a single main street that ran for maybe 4 blocks before the trees swallowed it up again on the other side. The town was small, Not charming small, just small. A hardware store with a faded green awning, a diner with the lights on, and 3 pickup trucks parked at angles in front. A little white church with a steeple. A post office that looked like it had once been somebody's shed. And at the end of the block, set back a little from the road, a general store with the words Hayes Mercantile painted in fading red letters above the door. The lawyer's office was already dark. It was almost 5. She would go in the morning. She pulled the Civic into one of the angle parking spots in front of the general store because she did not know what else to do. The bell above the door rang as she pushed it open, and a woman behind the counter looked up from a clipboard. The woman was somewhere in her late 60s. Her hair was gray and pulled back in a loose braid that hung down the front of her shoulder. She wore reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a flannel shirt buttoned all the way to the throat, and she had the strong, square hands of a woman who had spent her life doing useful work. She looked at Adeline standing in the doorway with her duffel bag over her shoulder, and her hands went still on the clipboard. Her face did not change exactly, but something inside it shifted, and she set the pen down and took off her reading glasses and laid them carefully on the counter beside the clipboard. "You're Wendell's granddaughter," she said. Adeline stopped where she was, halfway between the door and the counter. The whole store was very quiet. A small refrigerator behind the woman hummed. From somewhere in the back came the soft click of a clock. "How did you know that?" The woman came around the counter slowly, as if she did not want to startle a deer. She stopped a careful distance away from Adeline, and she looked at her face the way a woman looks at a photograph she has not seen in many years. "Because you look exactly like your father," she said. The words went into Adeline like a fishhook. "I'm Mabel Hayes," the woman said. "I knew your grandfather for the better part of 30 years. I was his closest friend, and he talked about you every single day for 15 years. Adeline stood in the middle of the store with the duffel bag pulling on her shoulder and her sneakers wet from the parking lot, and she could not make her mouth work. Mabel did not try to hug her. Mabel did not get emotional. Mabel just looked at her with eyes that were warm and steady and patient, the eyes of a woman who had been waiting for this exact moment, and she nodded once slowly as if to say, "All right, then let's begin. Have you eaten today?" "I had a granola bar." Mabel walked to the back of the store and came out 2 minutes later with a brown paper bag. She set it on the counter and she put things into it without asking. A loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, 2 apples, a bottle of water, a box of saltines, a small block of yellow cheese wrapped in waxed paper, a package of bologna, a roll of paper towels. "I can't pay for those," Adeline said. Mabel didn't look up. "Wendell paid for these," she said, "a long time ago. He left money at this store every month. He said it was for the day you came." She pushed the bag across the counter. "I've been putting it aside." Adeline reached for the bag, and her hand shook so hard she had to use the other one to steady it. She did not cry, but her eyes filled up, and she stood there at the counter, holding the brown paper bag, and looking at Mabel Hayes through a glaze of water she would not let fall. "What was he like?" she finally said. Mabel leaned back against the counter and folded her arms across her chest and looked out through the front window at the gathering dusk over the main street. "He was a carpenter," she said. 40 years a carpenter. Built houses up and down this valley. After your father died, he went through a hard stretch. drinking. 2 bad years. But he pulled himself out of it, got sober and stayed sober. Spent every year after that working on the cabin out on Old Creek Road. She paused. Built it with his own 2 hands. Every nail, every board, every joint. Took him 15 years. Why didn't he find me? Mabel looked at her then, and there was something hard in her eyes that was not directed at Adeline, but at something far away, something she could not say out loud yet. "He tried honey," Mabel said. "Lord, he tried everything." She gave Adeline directions. 2 miles up Old Creek Road. Take the left fork, where the road splits at the dead birch tree. The mailbox has no name on it. "You go on out there now," Mabel said. "Get yourself settled. I'll come by tomorrow." Adeline drove with the brown paper bag of groceries on the passenger seat next to the photograph of her father. The road went from pavement to gravel to packed dirt, and the trees pressed in on both sides until the sky was just a narrow ribbon of pale evening overhead. The Civic bounced along the ruts. A deer crossed the road in front of her and froze with one foreleg lifted, and she stopped and they looked at each other for a long moment before the deer flicked its tail and walked into the underbrush. She came around the last bend, and she saw the cabin. It sat at the end of the road in a clearing of mowed grass. 1 story. A covered porch running across the front with a railing that needed sanding. The roof was weathered cedar shake, but even from the driveway, she could see that every line of it was straight. Every angle was true. Every joint was tight. And the door frame. The door frame had been hand-carved. A pattern of leaves and branches ran along the top. Deeply cut, every leaf different from every other leaf. The kind of work that takes a man weeks and that no machine can do. She picked up the brass key from under the brick beside the porch step, exactly where Edwin Hartwell had told her it would be. The key was old, heavy, warm from sitting in the sun. She slid it into the lock. The door swung open without a sound. The hinges had been oiled recently. Somebody had been keeping this place up. Inside, the cabin smelled like cedar and dust, and the faint sweet tang of beeswax. A small living room with a stone fireplace. A kitchen with 1 window over the sink, and a wood-burning cook stove against the back wall. A short hallway leading to 1 bedroom and 1 small bathroom. Everything was built from the same warm-toned pine. Every shelf was level. Every drawer slid open and shut without catching. Nothing creaked. The floorboards were tongue and groove, fitted so tight you couldn't have slid a sheet of paper between them. She set her duffel bag on the floor, and she walked through the rooms, slowly running her hand along the walls, opening drawers and finding them empty, opening cabinets and finding them empty, standing at the kitchen window and looking out at the backyard, where an old oak tree spread its branches over a square of weeds that had once been a garden. There was no furniture except a single wooden chair by the fireplace and a small side table beside it. And on the mantel above the fireplace, all by itself, a brass candlestick with a half-burned candle. She found a broom in the closet, and she swept the floors. She wiped the counters with a damp rag she found in a drawer. She turned on the kitchen faucet, and brown water sputtered out for 10 seconds before running clear. She tested the bathroom sink. She tested the bedroom light switch. Everything worked. She made a peanut butter sandwich, and she sat down on the floor in the living room, with her back against the wall by the fireplace, and she ate it slowly, listening to the silence of the cabin and the wind moving in the pines outside. And she felt the day catch up with her in one long slow wave that pressed her back against the wall and made her close her eyes. She had been driving for 3 days. She had been alone for 3 days. She had $34 and a brown paper bag of groceries and a cabin in the woods of northern Vermont that an old man she had never met had built for her with his own hands. She opened her eyes, and that was when she saw it. The baseboard. The baseboard that ran along the wall beside her, the one her shoulder was almost touching, was the same warm pine as every other baseboard in the cabin. The same smooth finish, the same careful joint at the corner. But it sat differently against the wall. Every other baseboard in the cabin was flush, tight, pressed against the drywall with the seamless precision of a man who measured twice and cut once. This one had a gap, a hair-thin gap that ran the entire length of the board. Not from settling, not from warping. The gap was uniform, exactly the same width all the way across. It was not a flaw. It was deliberate. It was built to move. She set the half-eaten sandwich on the floor. She got onto her knees, and she pressed her palm against one end of the baseboard. Nothing happened. She pressed the other end. The board slid sideways on hidden tracks, smooth and silent, and disappeared behind the wall. Behind it was a compartment, cedar-lined, about 8 inches deep and 2 feet wide, and sitting inside side by side were 3 white envelopes. Each one was labeled in careful, steady handwriting. Adeline, age 6. Adeline, age 7. Adeline, age 8. She picked up the first envelope with hands that had gone numb. She slid her thumb under the flap. The seal gave way without resistance. Inside was a birthday card. Simple, a drawing of a yellow cake on the front with 3 candles. She opened it. Happy birthday, Adeline. I hope this one reaches you. I sent a card to your mother's house, but it came back like the others, so I am keeping this one here instead. You are 6 years old today, and I have never stopped thinking about you. Your father would be so proud of the girl you are becoming, even though I am not allowed to see it. I love you, sweetheart. Grandpa Wendell. She sat on the floor of the cabin her grandfather had built, and she cried. Not quietly, not with any kind of composure. She pulled her knees up to her chest, and she pressed the card against her heart, and she sobbed until her ribs ached, and the light through the window turned orange, and then gray, and the room went dim around her. He had not forgotten her. He had never forgotten her. He had been right here the whole time, writing her name on envelopes she would never receive, keeping them safe in the walls of a house he was building for the day she would finally come. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She reached for the second envelope. The second envelope was thicker than the first. She opened it carefully, pulling the card out by its edges. A birthday card with a picture of balloons on the front. Inside the same steady handwriting. Happy birthday, Adeline. You are 7 today. I drove past your mother's house last week. I parked my truck across the street and I sat there for an hour. I could see your bedroom light on. I wanted to walk up and knock on the door. I wanted that more than anything. But the restraining order says I cannot come within 200 feet of you. So I sat in the truck, and I watched your light until it went off. Then I drove home and wrote you this card. I love you, sweetheart. Grandpa Wendell. She pressed her hand flat against the floor to keep from falling forward. She opened the third envelope. Happy birthday, Adeline. You are 8. I filed a petition with the court last month for visitation rights. The judge denied it. Your mother's lawyer said I was an unfit influence. I have been sober for 2 years now, but the things I did before that still follow me around. I am going to keep trying. I will never stop trying. I love you. Grandpa Wendell. 3 cards. 3 years of trying to reach a granddaughter who didn't even know he existed. Adeline put the cards back in their envelopes one by one. She set them on the floor beside her. She sat there for a long time looking at the compartment she had slid open, at the cedar-lined hollow that had been hidden inside the wall of the cabin for over a decade waiting. The tracks were smooth. The fit was precise. Someone had built this hiding spot with the same care as every other joint in the cabin. She was sure there were more. She stood up. Her legs were stiff from sitting. She walked the perimeter of the living room, pressing her palms against baseboards, knocking on walls, running her fingers along every seam where wood met wood. Nothing moved. She went into the kitchen. She started opening cabinets. She checked the backs of shelves. She pulled drawers out as far as they would go and looked behind them. Wendell Holloway had been a carpenter for 40 years. He had known how to make things invisible. She almost missed it. The panel under the kitchen sink looked like a single piece of pine, the same grain as every other panel in the kitchen. But when she pressed her thumb along the bottom edge, she felt a slight give. She pressed harder. The panel tilted forward on a hidden hinge and swung down toward her, revealing a hollow space behind the plumbing. Inside, stacked in a careful pile, were 6 more envelopes. Ages 9 through 14. She sat down on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet, and she opened them in order one by the light of the single overhead bulb. The handwriting was the same. The cards were the same simple style drawings of cakes and balloons and small, careful watercolors on the front. The messages inside were the same. I am still here, Adeline. I have not forgotten. I think about you every single day. Tucked behind each card folded once and slipped between the inside flap and the cardboard backing were small bills. 20s, 50s, 6 years of birthday cash she had never received. She counted it sitting on the kitchen floor. $420. The message inside the age 12 card was longer than the others. Adeline, I send a card to your mother's house every year. They always come back. So I will keep them here instead. I do not know if you will ever see these, but I write them anyway. Because the alternative is doing nothing. And I made a promise to your father that I would never do nothing. She held the card in both hands, and she felt the world tilt under her. Behind the envelopes, pushed all the way to the back of the compartment, was something else. A small wooden box about the size of a paperback book. She pulled it out carefully. It was heavier than it looked. The wood was sanded smooth and finished with a soft hand-rubbed oil. There was a tiny brass clasp on the front, no bigger than a dime. She opened it. A music box mechanism sat inside. The brass comb and cylinder had been fitted precisely into a hollowed-out cradle of the same pine, with a small key on the outside. She turned the key 3 times. She let it go. The mechanism began to play. It was a lullaby. Slow, gentle. A tune she did not recognize. though something in the back of her mind, very faint, said that she had heard it once somewhere a long time ago, in a memory she could not quite reach. On the inside of the lid, burned into the wood with a wood-burning tool, were 5 words. "I made this for you." Adeline sat on the kitchen floor, and she held the music box in her lap, and she let it play until it wound down. The silence after it stopped was the deepest silence she had ever heard. She wound it again. She closed her eyes, and for a moment in the small wooden cabin at the end of the dirt road, with the night pressing dark against the windows and the wind moving in the pines outside, she did not feel alone. She was still sitting on the kitchen floor with the music box in her hands when she heard tires on gravel. Headlights swept across the kitchen window. An engine cut off. A door opened and closed. Footsteps came up the porch steps. A soft knock at the front door. She got to her feet slowly, and she crossed the living room, and she opened the door, and Mabel Hayes was standing on the porch holding a casserole dish wrapped in a dish towel. "Didn't want to come by too early," Mabel said. "Figured you'd need a night to settle in. But then I figured maybe you'd also need supper." She held up the dish. "Chicken and rice, nothing fancy." Adeline took the dish. It was still warm through the towel. She did not trust herself to speak. Mabel stepped inside without being invited the way a person does in a house where they have been 100 times before, and she set her purse on the small side table by the chair, and she looked around the cabin with the soft eyes of someone visiting a familiar room they have not seen in a while. "He kept this place spotless," she said. "I've been checking on it every week since he passed, making sure the pipes didn't freeze. Nothing got in. You've been coming here every week for 6 months." "Promised him I would," Mabel said. "Wasn't about to break a promise to Wendell Holloway." They sat at the small table in the kitchen. Mabel pulled a wooden crate out of the closet and turned it upside down for a stool. Adeline ate the chicken and rice, and Mabel did not push her to talk, just sat there with her hands folded on the table and waited. Finally, Adeline set down her fork. "Mabel," she said, "I found things in the walls, behind the baseboard in the living room, under the kitchen sink." Mabel looked at her. Her face did not change. "He told me he was doing something like that," she said quietly. "Never told me what. Never told me where. Said it was between him and you." Adeline looked down at the empty plate. The food had been simple and warm, and it was the best meal she had eaten in 3 days. She felt tears coming, and she pushed them back. "Tell me what happened to my father." Mabel's hands folded a little tighter together on the table. She looked out the small kitchen window where the dark was complete now, and only their reflection looked back. "Construction accident," she said. "A scaffold collapsed on a high-rise job about 60 miles south of here. Calvin was up 4 stories when it gave way. He was a carpenter too. Learned everything from your grandfather. Had his own little residential business and was doing fine. But he took the construction job because it paid 3 times what residential did." She paused. She looked at Adeline. "He took it to pay for your grandfather's heart surgery." Adeline stopped breathing. "Your grandfather had a heart condition. He needed surgery, but the insurance wouldn't cover all of it. The gap was about $12,000. Calvin took the construction job to close that gap. Wendell told him not to, begged him not to. Calvin said, 'You raised me by yourself after Mom left. You taught me everything. Let me take care of you for once.'" Mabel's voice went very quiet. The scaffold collapsed in his 3rd week on the job. Adeline could not move. "Your grandfather never forgave himself," Mabel said. "He believed that Calvin died because of him, because of his bad heart and his lousy insurance." She looked at Adeline across the table, and her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "That's the beginning of it, honey. That's just the beginning. There's more in these walls. A lot more." She stood up. She picked up her purse. "I'll let you find the rest in your own time." She walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob, and she turned back. "Whatever your mother told you about him," she said, "I want you to know one thing tonight, and we can talk about the rest tomorrow. Your grandfather loved you, every single day, for 15 years. He sat on that porch you're standing on every evening of his life, rain or shine, and he watched the road because he believed that one day you would come." She opened the door. She stepped out onto the porch. "And here you are." Then she pulled the door shut behind her, and the cabin was quiet again. And Adeline stood in the middle of the kitchen, with her hand pressed against her mouth, and the music box still sitting open on the table beside her. And she understood with a slow, growing certainty that she had not yet found the half of what was hidden in these walls. She had not even begun. She did not sleep that night. She tried. She rolled out the duffel bag on the bedroom floor, and she lay down on top of it, and she pulled her jacket over her shoulders. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the handwriting on the envelopes. She saw the 5 words burned into the lid of the music box. She saw a man she had never met sitting in a pickup truck across the street from her childhood house, watching her bedroom light go off at the end of the day. Around 3 in the morning, she gave up. She got up. She made coffee on the small electric burner in the kitchen with the supplies Mabel had brought, and she drank it standing at the kitchen window, watching the dark begin to bleed out of the sky above the oak tree in the backyard. When the sun finally came up, she went looking for more. The bedroom was the smallest room in the cabin, a narrow closet with a hanging rod, a single window facing the backyard, bare walls of the same warm pine as the rest of the place. She went over every surface slowly, the way Wendell himself would have done it, the way a carpenter inspects a piece of work that is hiding something from him. She knelt and checked the floorboards. She ran her fingers along the window frame. She knocked on the drywall in slow, careful taps, listening for the hollow knock of a space behind it. She opened the closet and felt along the back wall. She almost missed it. The panel was on the wall opposite the window. The same pine, the same finish. But when she put her palm flat against it and pushed, it moved. Just barely. A 1/16 of an inch. She worked her fingers around the edges until she found the catch. A small wooden button, no bigger than a pencil eraser, recessed into the trim at the bottom corner. She pressed it. The panel swung inward on a hidden hinge. This compartment was deeper than the others, almost a foot deep, the width of 2 hands across. Inside, side by side, were 2 stacks of envelopes, each one tied together with plain kitchen string. She pulled them out and sat down on the bedroom floor, with her back against the bed frame. The first stack was thicker. 15 envelopes, plain white, business-sized. She slid the string off and fanned them out across her lap. Every single envelope was addressed in Wendell's handwriting to Beverly Marsden at her mother's address. The address Adeline had grown up at. The house she had been thrown out of 4 days ago. And across the front of every single envelope in thick red ink and handwriting, she would have recognized anywhere, because she had grown up watching it write grocery lists and school excuse notes and birthday cards for relatives she had never met, was the same stamped message. Return to sender, in her mother's hand. 15 letters, 15 years. Every single one of them opened, resealed, and sent back. She picked up the first letter. Her hands were shaking. The postmark on the envelope was from when she was 4 years old, just over a year after her father had died. She slid the letter out and unfolded it. Beverly, I am sober. I have been sober for 8 months. I am asking you, please, let me see my granddaughter. I will come to your house. I will meet in a public place. I will do whatever you need me to do. She is my son's daughter. Calvin would want her to know me. Please. She picked up the second letter. A year later. Beverly, I have filed the paperwork. My lawyer says we have a real case. I am not trying to take Adeline from you. I just want to see her once a month. One afternoon. That is all I am asking. One afternoon a month. I will bring her back at any time you say. I will sign anything you want me to sign. Please. The 6th letter 5 years in. Beverly, I know you read these before you send them back. The postmarks show they have been opened. I do not understand what I have done that is so terrible you would keep a man from knowing his only granddaughter. Calvin is gone. Adeline is all I have left of him. Please. The 12th letter. Beverly, I have stopped hiring lawyers. I have stopped going to court. It does not work, and I cannot afford it anymore. But I want you to know something. I have not stopped. I will never stop. I am building something for her. When she is old enough, she will find me or I will find her. One of those things will happen. I believe that. Adeline set the letters down in her lap. She did not cry. The thing inside her had moved past crying. There was a deep, cold place opening up in her chest, and she sat with it for a long time before she could make herself reach for the second stack. The second stack was only one envelope. It was older than the others. The paper was yellowed at the edges, and soft, the kind of soft an envelope gets when it has been handled many times by hands that loved it. The handwriting on the front was not Wendell's. It was faster, younger, less careful. The letters slanted forward, as if the person who wrote them had been in a hurry, or as if he had not been a man who wrote letters often. It was addressed simply. Dad. Adeline's hand went still on the envelope. She knew before she opened it whose handwriting this was. She had seen it once before in pencil on the back of a photograph. Calvin and Addie first week home. She opened the envelope very, very carefully. The letter was 3 pages written on lined paper torn from a yellow legal pad. The pages were soft and crisp at the edges. She could see where Wendell had folded them and unfolded them so many times that the creases had begun to wear through. She read, Dad, I know you do not want me taking this job. I know the site is bad and the foreman cuts corners. I have heard the stories, same as you. But your surgery is in 6 weeks, and the insurance gap is $12,000, and I am not going to let you skip it again. You skipped it last year. You are not skipping it this year, so please stop arguing with me about it. You raised me by yourself after Mom left. I was 7 years old. You worked 2 jobs, and you came home every night and made me dinner and helped me with my homework, and you never once let me feel like I was missing something. You taught me how to drive a nail straight. You taught me how to read a level. You taught me how to keep my word. So this is me keeping my word. Let me take care of you for once. I will be careful. I promise. I am not taking any unnecessary risks up there. 3 months is all I need. 3 months and the gap is closed, and you have your surgery, and I come home to Beverly and Addie, and we go back to the way things were. But if something happens, which it will not, but if it does, take care of my little girl. Take care of my Addie. Promise me, Dad. Promise me you will not let her grow up without somebody who knew me. Promise me she will know what I sounded like. Promise me you will tell her I loved her. Promise me. I am 24 years old, Dad. I cannot tell you how strange it is to write a letter like this. But I am writing it because you taught me to plan for the worst, even when you are sure the worst will not happen. So here it is, just in case. I love you. I will see you Sunday. Calvin. The letter had been written 1 week before the scaffold collapsed. Adeline sat on the bedroom floor, and she held the letter in both hands, and she could not breathe. The words on the page blurred, and she pressed the letter against her chest, and she curled forward until her forehead touched her knees, and she stayed like that. She did not make a sound. She just sat there, rocking very slightly with her father's last letter pressed against her heart. She did not hear the front door open. She did not hear the footsteps in the hallway. But at some point, Mabel was there, sitting down on the bedroom floor next to her, not touching her, not speaking, just close enough that Adeline could feel the warmth of another person beside her. They sat like that for a long time. When Adeline could speak again, she handed the letter to Mabel without a word. Mabel put on the reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck. She read it slowly. Her lips moved very slightly with the words. When she finished, she folded the letter back along its creases, the way you would fold a flag, and she pressed the bridge of her nose with her thumb and forefinger. "He never showed me this," Mabel said. "I did not know. It was in the wall." I know. Mabel handed the letter back. Adeline slid it carefully back into the yellowed envelope. "Your grandfather carried your father's death with him every day of his life," Mabel said. "He believed it was his fault, his heart, his bills, his surgery. He could not let it go." She pushed herself up off the floor with one hand on the bed frame. "Come on, honey. Come outside. You need air." They sat on the porch steps together. The morning was cold and clear, and the sun was full above the trees now. A few yellow leaves had begun to come down off the oak in the backyard. The world smelled like pine and dirt, and the cold green smell of the creek that ran somewhere off through the woods. After a while, Adeline took her phone out of her pocket. She looked at it for a long time. "What is it?" Mabel said. "He's been calling." "Who has?" "Harlan, my stepfather. He's called me 4 times since yesterday. I haven't answered." Mabel did not say anything. "He left a voicemail this morning. Have you listened to it?" "Not yet." Mabel did not push her. She just sat on the porch step with her hands folded in her lap and waited. Adeline tapped the screen. She put the phone to her ear. The voicemail played on speaker because she had forgotten to take it off speaker, and because part of her wanted Mabel to hear. wanted somebody else in the world to hear what she had grown up with. The voice was Harlan's, but it was a different Harlan than the one who had thrown the trash bag on her bed. Adeline. Hi, sweetheart. Listen, your mother and I have been thinking about you. We feel just terrible about how things ended. Things got said that shouldn't have been said. You know how it is. Family is family. Why don't you come on home? Your mother misses you. We'll talk it through. A pause. The voice shifted. The warmth went out of it like a switch had been flipped. Also, we need to talk about this business with your grandfather. The lawyer called your mother. Your mother is the next of kin, Adeline. Not you. Your mother. That property and whatever the old man left, that should be coming to her, not to a teenager who doesn't know what to do with it. We can work this out together as a family. But if you want to make it difficult, we have a lawyer of our own. We will go to court if we have to. I am telling you this for your own good. Call me back. The voicemail ended. Adeline lowered the phone. She set it face down on the porch beside her. She looked at Mabel. Mabel was looking at the trees across the road, but her jaw had set in a hard line, and there was a small muscle moving in her cheek. Let them come, Mabel said finally. Let them drive up here and try it. This whole town knew Wendell Holloway. Every soul in Briar Creek will line up at that courthouse to testify on his behalf. And on yours. He sounded almost nice for a second. That's the dangerous kind. Mabel reached over and put her hand briefly on Adeline's hand. Just for a moment. Then she took it back. You go on inside, and you eat something. I have to open the store at 10. You come down later if you want to. Or stay here. Either way. She stood. She walked down the porch steps. She paused at her truck and turned back. And Adeline, don't you call him back. Not today. Not until you are ready. Your grandfather had a lawyer in town who is your lawyer now. You let him handle it. She drove away. Adeline sat on the porch steps with the phone face down beside her, and she watched the dust settle on the road where Mabel's truck had been. She was still sitting there an hour later when the mail truck came around the bend. It was an old white postal truck with the steering wheel on the wrong side and a flashing yellow light on top. The driver was a man in his late 60s with a gray beard and a faded blue postal cap pulled down low over his eyes. He slowed the truck to a crawl as he approached the empty mailbox at the end of the driveway. And then he stopped, and he leaned his arm on the open window, and he looked up at the porch. You must be the granddaughter, he called. She nodded. He killed the engine. He climbed down out of the truck slowly, the way an older man does when his knees are not what they used to be, and he walked partway up the driveway and stopped a respectful distance from the porch and took off his cap. Name's Vernon Briggs. Carried mail on this route 26 years. Wendell was on my route the whole time. Yes, sir. He turned his cap over in his hands. I just wanted to say, your grandfather sat on that porch every evening I ever drove past. Every single evening. Rain. Snow. 100-degree heat in August. He would lift his hand to me when I drove by, and I would lift mine back, and that was how it was for 26 years. He cleared his throat. One time I stopped. Had a package needed a signature. He invited me up onto the porch and we had a glass of iced tea, and I asked him. I said, Wendell, what are you doing out here all by yourself every evening? Don't you get lonesome? He looked at her. You know what he said? She shook her head. He said, Vernon, I'm waiting. She'll come one day. She'll come, and when she does, I want her to see the porch first." He put his cap back on. "I figured you ought to know that." He walked back to his truck. He climbed in slowly. He started the engine, and he lifted his hand to her in a small wave, and he drove off down the road. The flashing yellow light bouncing along the gravel, and Adeline sat on the porch steps, and she put her face in her hands, and she stayed there until the sound of the engine faded into the trees. She went back inside. She still had the living room and the fireplace to search. She had checked the baseboards already. She had checked the walls. There was one place she had not yet looked. She walked to the fireplace, and she knelt down on the hearth. The hearth was made of flat field stones, fitted together without mortar, every stone tight against its neighbors. She had noticed yesterday how perfect the work was. Now she looked at it differently. She looked at it the way a man hides a thing, looks at a wall. One stone near the bottom of the hearth sat slightly higher than the others. Not by much. A fraction of an inch. The kind of thing you would never notice unless you were looking for it. She pressed it. Nothing. She pressed it and pushed sideways. The stone shifted. She worked it free and set it aside on the floor. Underneath was a small brass handle set flush into the subfloor of the cabin. She put her finger through the loop, and she pulled. A square section of floorboard lifted on hidden hinges, the joinery so tight she would never have spotted it if she had not been searching for it. The hidden compartment beneath was lined with the same cedar as the others, but it was bigger. A foot square, 6 inches deep. Inside were 2 things: a thick manila envelope swollen with papers, the metal clasp tarnished from age, and a small wooden box, darker than the music box, heavier. The wood was something different. Walnut, maybe. She lifted the manila envelope out first. It was heavy. She sat down cross-legged on the living room floor, and she unfolded the metal clasp, and she pulled out the contents. Court documents, pages and pages of them, printed on heavy legal paper, official stamps, case numbers across the top. She read. The first set was a petition filed in the county family court when Adeline was 6 years old. In the matter of visitation rights for Wendell R. Holloway, petitioner, regarding the minor child Adeline T. Holloway. Wendell had filed for supervised visitation. He had attached character references from Mabel, from his doctor, from his AA sponsor, from 2 former clients whose houses he had built. He had included proof of 18 months of continuous sobriety, certified by his treatment counselor. He had asked the court for 1 afternoon a month, supervised by any party of Beverly's choosing. The response from Beverly's lawyer was stapled behind the petition. It was 4 pages long. It alleged that Wendell had a history of severe alcohol abuse. It alleged that his living conditions were unstable. It alleged that he posed a danger to the minor child. And on the 3rd page, it referenced a sworn affidavit from one Harlan J. Marsden, stepfather of the minor child. Adeline turned to the affidavit. Her hands had gone steady. Cold steady. The kind of steady that comes when the body knows that crying will not help. The affidavit was 2 pages. By Harlan J. Marsden, being duly sworn to declare the following to be true under penalty of perjury. On or about the night of October 14th, the petitioner Wendell R. Holloway arrived at our residence in a visibly intoxicated state at approximately 11:30 p.m. He pounded on the front door for several minutes. When I opened the door, he shouted threats at myself and my wife, Beverly Marsden. He stated, and I quote, that he would kill me if I kept him from his granddaughter. He stated that he had a firearm in his vehicle. He refused to leave the property when asked. I called the local police, who arrived approximately 20 minutes later, at which point Mr. Holloway had departed. The affidavit was signed and notarized. Adeline read it twice. Then she read the judge's ruling 3 pages further back in the stack. The court finds that the petitioner has not demonstrated sufficient stability or evidence of a non-threatening relationship to warrant unsupervised or supervised visitation at this time. Petition denied. The court further orders a no-contact restraining order at the request of the respondent with a 200-foot perimeter. Petition denied. She looked again at the affidavit. She thought about the 3rd birthday card she had opened the night before. The one written when Wendell was sober for 2 years. The one where he had said the things I did before that still follow me around. He had not denied his past. He had owned it. But the man in this affidavit, the man who had pounded on the door at midnight and threatened murder and waved a firearm around, that man had never existed. Adeline knew it, the way she knew her own face in the mirror. She had grown up with Harlan Marsden. She had watched him for 11 years. She had seen him lie about smaller things 10,000 times. Lie to her teachers, lie to the neighbors, lie to her own mother about where he had been and what he had been doing. She knew the shape of a Harlan, lie the way a fisherman knows the shape of a fish under the water, and she knew with absolute certainty that the man who had written this affidavit had sat down at a kitchen table somewhere and made the whole thing up. He had perjured himself in a court of law to take her grandfather away from her. She set the court papers down on the floor. She picked up the wooden walnut box. She opened it. Inside, stacked neatly in a tied bundle, were 15 United States savings bonds. Heavy paper. Official seals. Serial numbers across the top. She lifted them out one at a time. Each one was issued in the name Adeline T. Holloway. Each one was dated 1 year apart. The earliest was from when she was 3 years old. The most recent was from last spring, 6 months before Wendell died. 15 savings bonds, 1 for every year. Bought one at a time by a retired carpenter living alone in a cabin in the woods. At the bottom of the box, folded flat against the wood, was a single sheet of yellow legal paper. She unfolded it. It was a column of numbers in Wendell's handwriting. He had added up the face values of the bonds plus accumulated interest year by year. The total at the bottom of the column was circled. $47,000. She looked at the number. She looked at the bonds spread out on the floor around her. She tried to make the math work in her head. A retired man living alone in a cabin in northern Vermont, on a carpenter's Social Security check, had set aside enough money every single year for 15 years to buy a savings bond in her name. He had eaten less. He had bought less. He had patched his own clothes and fixed his own truck and saved one bond at a time year after year for a girl he had never gotten to meet. $47,000. She put her hand over her mouth. Underneath the bonds, pushed flat against the bottom of the box, was one more envelope. This one was different. Not a birthday card. Not a court document. Just an envelope with one word written on the front, in shakier handwriting than the others. Adeline. She picked it up. She knew before she opened it. She did not need to read it to know. This was the last letter. This was the one Wendell had written near the end. She opened it. The letter was 4 pages written on the same yellow legal paper as the bond tally. The handwriting was looser, slower. The strokes did not have the same confidence as the birthday cards from earlier years. This was a man writing with hands that had begun to shake. She read, "Dear Adeline, if you are reading this, then you found the cabin, and you found what I left for you. I hope you found it in order. The baseboard in the living room first, then the kitchen sink, then the bedroom, then the fireplace. That is how I built them. 1 compartment a year until I ran out of wall space. There are no more. This is the last one. I want to tell you why I hid everything in the walls instead of putting it in a bank or giving it to a lawyer. The answer is simple. She cannot steal what is hidden in the walls of a house she will never visit. Your mother took the money I mailed. She destroyed the birthday cards I sent. She turned every lawyer and every judge against me. But she does not know this cabin exists. She has never been here, and she never will be unless you decide to tell her. I need to tell you about your father, in case nobody else ever will. Calvin died on a construction site on the morning of April 14th. He was 24 years old. He took that job to pay for my heart surgery because my insurance was worthless, and the hospital wanted $12,000 up front. I told him not to go. I told him I would rather die on my kitchen floor than put him up on a scaffold he did not trust. He went anyway. He said, "Let me take care of you for once, Dad." 3 weeks later, the scaffold gave way, and he was gone. I have carried that with me every day since. Your father died because of my heart. My bad heart killed my boy. And then your mother took you from me, and I lost both of them in the space of 2 years. I drank for 2 years. I will not pretend otherwise. I drank hard, and I did things I am ashamed of, and there were nights I do not remember. I was a poor excuse for a man in those 2 years. But I got sober, Adeline. I got sober because I made your father a promise the day you were born, and I intended to keep it even after he was gone. That promise was to take care of you. I could not get to you. Your mother saw to that. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I built this cabin. I built every joint and every shelf and every drawer. I built the hiding places in the walls 1 a year on your birthday. I bought a savings bond every spring. I wrote you a card every year, and I tucked it into a wall. And I told myself that one day when you were old enough, you would find your way here, and you would find what I left for you, and you would know. You would know that you were loved. That is the whole thing, Adeline. That is the enter thing I wanted you to know. You were loved every single day of your life by a man you never got to meet, by a man whose only son was your father. You were loved when you were born, when I held you in the hospital, and you grabbed my finger with your whole little hand. You were loved when the court said no. You were loved when I was drinking and could not love myself. You were loved when I built this cabin, and when I hid these letters in the walls, and you are loved now wherever I am. You are loved now. You have your father's hands, Adeline. I know that even though I never got to see you hold a tool. Mabel told me things about you when she could find out anything. She said you were quiet and strong, and you did not complain. That is Calvin. That is exactly who Calvin was. Whatever your mother tells you about me, know this. I tried. I tried with everything I had. The law would not let me through. So I built a door of a different kind. You walked through it. The bonds are yours. The cabin is yours. Everything I built and everything I built and saved for you. I am old now and tired, and I do not think I have much time left. But I leave here knowing I kept the only promise that ever mattered to me. I took care of my granddaughter. I love you, sweetheart. Your grandfather. Wendell. Adeline sat on the floor of the living room, and she held the letter in her lap, and she did not cry. The crying was somewhere far away from her now, in a quieter place, a place she would visit later when she was alone with it. She read the letter again. Then she folded it back along its creases, and she slid it back into the envelope, and she put the envelope on the wooden chair by the fireplace where she could see it. She got up. Her legs were unsteady. She walked into the kitchen, and she stood at the sink, and she drank a full glass of water. She washed her face with cold tap water. She dried her hands on a dish towel. She walked back out onto the porch. The afternoon was getting on. The light had begun to slant. Somewhere off in the trees, a woodpecker was working on a dead branch. The wind moved through the pines with a long, low sound, like a person breathing out. She stood at the porch railing. She put both her hands on it. She felt the rough wood under her palms. He had built this. He had cut this railing and sanded it and set it up on this porch with his own hands. She was leaning on something he had made. She straightened. She walked down the porch steps. She walked around the side of the cabin to the backyard, where the oak tree spread its arms over the patch of weeds that had once been a garden. She stood under the oak, and she looked up at its branches against the late afternoon skies. I'm sorry, she said, out loud, to no one in particular. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I would have. If anybody had told me, I would have come. The wind moved in the branches above her. She did not know what she had expected. A sign, a feeling, something. There was nothing. Just the wind and the woodpecker and the long, slow afternoon light over the trees. But she stood there for a long time anyway. And after a while, she felt the smallest, strangest thing. Not a presence, not a voice, just a quiet. A kind of quiet she had not known was possible. The quiet of a place where she had been expected. She walked back around to the front of the cabin. She had work to do. She had a porch railing that needed sanding. She had a faucet that still dripped if you turned it the wrong way. She had a back step with a cracked board. She went inside. She found Wendell's toolbox in the closet exactly where she had left it. She picked up a square of 80 grit sandpaper, and she walked back out onto the porch, and she began. She sanded the railing the way she had seen carpenters on YouTube videos. Sand railings going with the grain, long even strokes taking her time. The wood under the sandpaper grew smooth. The rough spots gave way. The afternoon went on. Sweat came up on her forehead despite the cold. She did not hear the truck until it was halfway up the driveway. She straightened up. She put her hand over her eyes against the sun. It was not Mabel's truck. It was a small silver sedan, out-of-state plates. The driver's side door opened first, and a woman stepped out. She was wearing a long wool coat and dark sunglasses, and she stood beside the car for a moment, looking up at the cabin, looking at the porch, looking at the carved leaves around the doorframe. The passenger door did not open. Adeline could see a figure inside, slumped low in the seat, head down, looking at a phone. The woman walked up the path slowly. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, and she took off her sunglasses, and she looked up at Adeline standing on the porch with a piece of sandpaper in her hand. It was her mother. Beverly Marsden was 42 years old, and she looked like she had not slept in a week. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her eyes were red at the edges, but her mouth was set in a hard line, and her hands were clasped in front of her, gripping each other so tightly that the knuckles had gone white. "Adeline," she said. Adeline did not answer. Beverly looked at the porch, at the sanded railing, at the cabin with its hand-carved doorframe. Something moved across her face that Adeline could not read. Maybe shame, maybe grief, maybe just the look of a woman seeing a place she had spent 15 years pretending did not exist. "We need to talk," Beverly said, "about your grandfather's property." Adeline set the sandpaper down on the railing. Behind her mother, the passenger door of the sedan finally opened. Harlan Marsden stepped out. He was wearing a sport coat over a button-down shirt, the way a man dresses when he wants to look like he means business. He did not come up the driveway. He leaned against the side of the car with his arms folded. The afternoon was very still. Adeline looked at her mother. Then she looked past her at Harlan, leaning on the sedan. Then she looked back at her mother. "Come up on the porch," she said quietly. "Just you, not him." Beverly hesitated. Then she climbed the porch steps. Adeline opened the door behind her. She did not invite her mother inside. She walked into the cabin alone, and she went to the bedroom, and she came back out a moment later, carrying the bundle of 15 letters tied with kitchen string. She set the bundle on the porch railing. She fanned the envelopes out so that the red return to sender stamps were visible on every single one. Beverly Marsden looked down at her own handwriting. 15 years of it splashed in red ink across her father-in-law's letters, and the color drained out of her face like a tide going out. She put one hand on the railing to steady herself. She did not speak. Adeline did not speak either. The afternoon light came slanting through the pines, and somewhere off in the trees, the woodpecker started up again. And on the porch of the cabin her grandfather had built too, women stood across from each other with 15 years of lies laid out on the railing between them, and neither one of them yet knew which one would speak first. The silence on the porch lasted a long time. The wind moved in the pines. Somewhere up the road, a crow called once twice, and was answered by another crow further off in the trees. The afternoon light came down through the branches and laid itself in long, pale stripes across the boards of the porch, where Wendell had cut and fitted them. Beverly Marsden did not look up from the letters. She looked at her own handwriting in red ink, 15 years of it, and her shoulders had gone narrow and pulled in the way shoulders go when a person is bracing against something that has finally found them. "I can explain these," she said. "I'm sure you can. Adeline. I read them, Mom. I read all of them." Beverly closed her eyes. "He wrote to you every year. For 15 years. He apologized in some of them. He begged in some of them. In one of them he said he just wanted one afternoon a month. One afternoon. And you wrote return to sender on every single one of them. It was complicated. No, it wasn't. The words came out flat. Not angry. Adeline was past angry. She was somewhere on the other side of angry in a country she had never been to before, and her voice came from there. It wasn't complicated. He was an old man trying to know his granddaughter, and you said no. Every time, for 15 years. There's nothing complicated about that. Beverly opened her eyes. She looked at Adeline. Her face had gone very pale. You don't know what he was like. You told me he was dead. That sentence hung in the air between them. Beverly flinched as if Adeline had struck her. You looked at me when I was a child, Adeline said, and you told me my grandfather had died before I was born. You let me grow up believing that. You let me write a school essay in the 4th grade about how I had no living grandparents. I remember writing it. I remember the teacher gave me a sticker for the handwriting. Adeline. He was 5 hours away. He was alive the whole time. He sat on this porch every single evening for 15 years, and he watched the road, and you knew. You knew where he was. You knew what he was doing, and you let me believe he was dead. Beverly's hand on the porch railing began to shake. Down the path by the sedan, Harlan straightened up. He uncrossed his arms. He took a step away from the car. Adeline saw him do it. "Stay where you are, Harlan," she called. He stopped. "This isn't about you yet." He stood very still in the middle of the driveway, his sport coat catching the afternoon wind, and he looked up at the porch with an expression that Adeline did not bother to read. She turned back to her mother. "There's more," she said. She walked to the door of the cabin, and she opened it, and she went inside. She came back out a minute later, carrying the manila envelope from under the fireplace hearth. The court documents. She set it on the porch railing next to the letters, and she opened the metal clasp, and she pulled out the affidavit, the one Harlan had signed and notarized when Adeline was 6 years old, and she set it on top of the envelope so that the heading was facing her mother. Beverly read the first line. Her hand went to her mouth. "You knew about this," Adeline said. You knew. Your lawyer used this in court to deny him visitation, to get a restraining order. This was the document that kept him 200 feet away from me for the rest of my childhood." Beverly did not answer. "Did it happen?" Adeline said. "Adeline, did it happen, Mom? Did he come to the house in the middle of the night drunk and threaten to kill Harlan and wave a gun? Did that happen?" A long, long pause. "No." The word came out very quiet. "He came to the house once," Beverly said. "He came one time. He had been drinking. He was not violent. He was crying, Adeline. He stood on the porch and he asked to see you. Harlan answered the door. Harlan told him to leave. Wendell left. That was it. He never came back. And the gun. There was no gun. And the threats. There were no threats." Adeline looked at her mother in the slanting afternoon light. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Harlan committed perjury, in a court of law, to take my grandfather away from me, and you signed off on it." At the bottom of the driveway, Harlan started up the path toward the porch. "That is enough," he called. "That is enough of this. Beverly, we are leaving." "Stop right there, Harlan." He didn't. He came up the path. He climbed the first porch step. He climbed the second. He never made it to the third. A truck door slammed somewhere up the road. Then another closer. Adeline did not turn to look, because she did not need to. She knew the sound of Mabel's old Ford. She had heard it on this driveway 4 times in 2 days. Mabel walked up the path slowly. She did not hurry. She walked with the deliberate steadiness of a woman who had decided how this was going to go before she ever got out of the truck. And her hands were empty, and her face was calm. And she stopped at the bottom of the porch steps about 6 feet away from Harlan. And she looked at him with her arms folded across her chest. "Hello there." Harlan looked at her. "This is a family conversation, ma'am." "That's so." Another vehicle came around the bend in the road. A red pickup dented along one side with a load of 2x4s strapped in the bed. It pulled up behind Mabel's truck, and the engine cut off, and a man stepped out. He was in his 60s, square through the shoulders, wearing a quilted vest over a flannel shirt. He had a clipboard in one hand. He did not say anything. He just walked partway up the driveway and stopped and stood there with the clipboard at his side. Then, from the opposite direction came the slow rumble of the postal truck. It came around the bend at a normal speed, and then it slowed, and then it stopped right in the middle of the road. Vernon Briggs killed the engine. He climbed down out of the cab. He did not come up the driveway. He just stood beside his truck, with his hands in his pockets, and he looked up at the porch. 3 of them, just standing there, not speaking, not coming closer, not doing anything at all except being present. Harlan Marsden looked at Mabel. He looked at the man with the clipboard. He looked at the mail carrier. And then he looked at the porch at Adeline standing there with the affidavit in her hand and the letters fanned out on the railing behind her. Something happened to his face. Adeline had grown up with Harlan Marsden. She had watched him for 11 years. She had seen him in every kind of mood a man could be in, and she had thought she knew every face he had. But she had never seen the face he had now. He looked like a man who had walked into a room expecting to find one person waiting for him and had found 100 instead. The color went out of him in stages. He took a step back down the porch steps. Then another. He did not look at Beverly. He did not look at anyone. He turned and he walked back down the path to the sedan, and he opened the driver's door, and he got in. He did not start the engine. He just sat there in the driver's seat behind the steering wheel of his silver sedan, with his hands in his lap and his head down. And after a long moment, Adeline understood that he was waiting for Beverly. She turned back to her mother. Beverly was crying. It was not loud. It was not the kind of crying she had ever done in front of Adeline before. It was the quiet, exhausted crying of a person who has been holding something for a very long time and has finally set it down and discovered she does not know how to stand up without it. "I want to tell you something," Beverly said. Adeline waited. "When I look at you," Beverly said, "I see Calvin." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "You have his hands. You have his way of going quiet when you're angry instead of yelling. You have the way he tilted his head when he was thinking that little tilt to the left. Every single thing about you. Every single thing." She drew a long breath. And Wendell's letters. Every one of those letters. Calvin's name was in every one. Calvin would want this. Calvin would have wanted that. Remember what Calvin said. Remember what Calvin did. Her voice broke. "I could not read his name, Adeline. I could not read his name without falling apart. I lost him when I was 24 years old. I was a widow at 24, with a 3-year-old daughter, and a father-in-law who showed up at my door, crying drunk in the middle of the night. I could not do it. I could not hold any of it. So I closed the door. I closed all the doors. She pressed her fist against her mouth. I was not protecting you from him, she said. I was protecting myself from remembering. She looked up. Harlan was wrong to lie. I was wrong to let him. I knew he was lying when he signed that paper, and I let him do it because I was tired. I was so tired, Adeline. I was so tired of fighting, so tired of feeling. I let Harlan handle everything because it was easier than handling anything myself. And when Wendell's letters came, I stamped them and sent them back because reading them was like opening a door I had nailed shut, and I could not open that door. Sweetheart, I could not. Not even for him. Not even for you. She lowered her hand. I am not asking you to forgive me. I would not forgive me. I am only telling you this because you asked, and because the truth has come this far already, and because I do not think I can carry it for another 15 years. Adeline did not speak. The wind moved in the pines. Down at the road, Vernon Briggs lifted his cap, brushed his hand through his hair, set the cap back on his head. The man with the clipboard had not moved. Adeline thought about her father. She thought about a 24-year-old woman sitting alone in a hospital corridor, being told that her husband was dead. She thought about a 3-year-old child in that woman's lap. She thought about the years that came after the years she could not remember the years before Harlan, the years when her mother was on her own with a small child, and a grief no one had taught her how to carry. She did not forgive her mother. She did not think she ever could not completely, not the way some people forgive. But she understood her a little, for the first time in her life. She walked into the cabin. She came back out a moment later, carrying a second cup of coffee in a chipped white mug. She handed it to her mother. Beverly took it with both hands. She did not say thank you. She just held the mug, and the steam came up into her face, and she closed her eyes against it. Sit down, Mom. Beverly sat down in the wooden chair on the porch. Adeline sat on the top step. They did not speak for a long time. The afternoon went on. At the bottom of the driveway, Mabel and the man with the clipboard and Vernon Briggs, slowly one by one, returned to their vehicles. Mabel got into her truck. She did not start it. She just sat there in the cab, with the window down waiting. After a long while, Adeline spoke. Do you want to see the inside? Beverly nodded. Adeline took her through the cabin slowly. She did not narrate. She just opened doors and let her mother look. Beverly walked through the rooms with her hands clasped in front of her, and she touched the walls and she touched the shelves, and she stopped at the kitchen window and looked out at the oak tree. He built this with his own hands. Every joint, every board. It took him 15 years. Yes. Beverly stood at the kitchen window for a long minute. I never came up here, she said. I never let myself imagine it. I would have, if I had let myself. I know, Mom. In the living room, Beverly stopped in front of the fireplace. The photograph of Calvin Holloway, 24 years old, holding a baby in a yellow blanket, was propped on the mantel where Adeline had put it that morning. Beverly looked at the photograph for a long time. Wendell took that picture, she said finally. I forgot that. Wendell came to the hospital the day after you were born, and he took that picture of Calvin holding you. I didn't know. I forgot a lot of things, Adeline. She picked up the photograph carefully. She held it in both hands. She looked at her dead husband's face and at the face of her own daughter as a newborn, and the tears came again, but quieter this time. She set the photograph back on the mantel exactly as she had found it. Adeline showed her the birthday cards from the first compartment. Just the first 3. 6, 7, 8. Beverly read them standing in the living room, and her hands shook the whole time, but she did not put them down until she had read all 3. She set them on the table beside the wooden chair. He was a better man than I gave him credit for. Yes, I should have known. Mabel told me once. She came down to see me about a year after Calvin died. She drove all the way down to my house and she sat in my kitchen, and she told me he was sober. She said, Beverly, he is sober, and he is sorry, and he is asking for one chance. I told her to leave. I told her never to come back. She left. Beverly looked at Adeline. She came down for him. She did that for him, and I sent her away. She told me you were a broken woman who did her worst, Adeline said, and that he was a broken man who did his best. Beverly nodded slowly. That sounds like her. Beverly left around 6 in the evening. Harlan started the car when he saw her come down the porch steps, and he sat behind the wheel without looking at the cabin or at Mabel's truck, or at anyone. Beverly opened the passenger door. She paused. She looked back at the porch. I am sorry, Adeline, she said. I know that is not enough. No, Mom, it isn't. Beverly nodded once. She got into the car. Harlan put it in reverse, and the sedan backed slowly down the driveway and turned around at the wide spot and drove away through the trees, and the sound of the engine faded into the woods. Adeline stood on the porch, and she watched the dust settle on the road. Mabel got out of her truck and walked up the path. You all right, honey? I will be. You did good. You did real good. Adeline did not answer. She did not feel like she had done good. She felt like she had done something necessary, and the difference between necessary and good was a thing she had not known existed until that afternoon. And she was tired now, the kind of tired that had nothing to do with sleep. Mabel sat with her on the porch step until the sun went down behind the pines. They did not talk much. After a while, Mabel stood up. I brought you a pie. Left it in the truck. I'll bring it up. She walked down to the truck and came back with a pie tin covered in foil and set it on the porch railing where the letters had been an hour earlier. Blueberry, she said. I figured today was a blueberry pie kind of day. She did not stay to eat it with her. She knew the way some people know that Adeline needed to be alone. She got into her truck. She lifted her hand. She drove away. Adeline ate 2 pieces of pie, sitting on the porch step in the dark. 2 weeks later, the phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. Adeline was outside hauling old garden tools out of the shed when she heard it, and she came inside wiping her hands on her jeans. It was Edwin Hartwell. Miss Holloway, I wanted to let you know that your mother's attorney called me this morning. They are withdrawing the petition. There will be no contest of the will. Everything stays as your grandfather left it. Adeline stood in the middle of the living room, with the phone pressed to her ear. Why? That I do not know. I did not ask, but the petition is gone. She thanked him, and she hung up, and she stood there for a moment looking at the wooden chair by the fireplace. Beverly called her that evening. It was a short call. They were all short calls. 10 minutes. 12 sometimes. They were not warm. They were not easy. But they happened once a week on Tuesdays, and Adeline did not refuse them. "I left him," Beverly said. "You left Harlan. I asked him to move out. He moved out this morning. His brother in Schenectady is letting him stay there for now. What happened?" "I saw the affidavit, Adeline. When you laid it out on the porch railing, I had not looked at it in 12 years. I had let myself forget what was in it. And when I saw it laid out there with all the letters, I understood something I had been refusing to understand for a long time." "What?" "That I had built a life with a man who would do that. Who would sit at a kitchen table and write down a lie about a grieving old man and sign it under oath just to keep his stepdaughter from a piece of her own family. I built a life on top of that. And when I saw it laid out on your porch, I could not unsee it." Adeline did not answer. "He is not coming back, Adeline." "All right, Mom. I am not saying that to win you back. I am saying it because it is true." "All right." A pause. "The town up here," Beverly said. "Briar Creek. The people who came to the porch that day. Mabel. The man with the lumber. The mail carrier. Do they know about the affidavit?" "Mabel knows. I have not told anybody else. You should know that word has gotten around down here too. I do not know how. Maybe Harlan's brother. Maybe one of the lawyers. But it has gotten around. People at the diner have stopped talking when Harlan walks in. 2 of his clients at the garage have moved their business. The neighbors on either side of his brother's house have not so much as nodded at him in 2 weeks. Adeline did not speak. "Small towns have a way of handling things," Beverly said. "I am learning that." After they hung up, Adeline sat in the wooden chair by the fireplace for a long time. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel anything that simple. She felt something closer to a quiet that had settled into the rooms of the cabin and into the corners of her life. The quiet that comes when a thing that should never have been said has finally been laid out, where it can be seen and recognized for what it was. She thought about Harlan Marsden sitting in his brother's spare bedroom in Schenectady. She did not feel sorry for him. She did not feel anything for him at all. The next morning, Mabel came up with a basket of fresh muffins from the bakery in town, and they sat on the porch and ate them with coffee, and Mabel looked at her over the top of her mug. "You hear the news?" "I heard. How do you feel about it?" "I don't know." "That's all right, too." Mabel set her coffee down. "You know," she said, "some people get bigger after grief. Some people get smaller. Your mother got smaller. She let a small man become the size of her whole life. She is still going to be a smaller woman than she could have been, Adeline. She is not going to be the mother you wished you had had. But she is starting to come back to her own size, and that is something." "Yes. And Harlan, he was always small. He just had people propping him up. The propping has stopped." She picked up her muffin. "That's how it works in small towns. That's how it has always worked. You do something foul to one of ours, and you find one day that the chairs at the diner are full when you walk in, and the gas station does not have your usual brand of cigarettes anymore, and the man you bought your truck off of will not return your calls when the transmission goes. Nobody draws a knife. Nobody yells. It just gets very quiet around you, and one day you realize you can't live there anymore." "Mabel." "Yes." Was that what you and the others were doing on the porch? Mabel chewed her muffin slowly. She swallowed. I was just standing in the driveway, honey. I cannot speak for anybody else. But there was a small movement in the corner of her mouth, the closest thing to a smile Adeline had ever seen on her. The weeks turned into a month. The month turned into 2. Adeline made a list of things the cabin needed, and she worked her way down the list one item at a time. She replaced the rotten porch post with a new one, cut from lumber. Mabel's husband Henry had once milled at the sawmill on the other side of the ridge. She rebuilt the back step. She replaced the cracked board in the bathroom floor. She fixed the window latch in the bedroom that did not quite catch. She oiled all the hinges in the cabin one by one until the doors moved without a sound the way Wendell had wanted them to. She bought a bed used from a family in town that was upgrading. She bought a small kitchen table and 2 chairs from the clearance section at the hardware store. She built a bookshelf for the alcove beside the fireplace, out of scrap lumber Henry gave her. It was not as fine as Wendell's work. The joints were tight, but they were not invisible. She was still learning. But it was hers, and the books on it were hers, and that was enough. She used part of the bond money to enroll in the community college, 20 miles east. Design and carpentry. 2 classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and a workshop on Wednesday afternoons, where she learned the table saw, and the router, and the joiner. Her instructor was a retired contractor named Mr. Whitaker, a big, quiet man with a gray beard and patient eyes. He watched her work one afternoon at the bench fitting a mortise and tenon joint for a small box she was making, and he stood behind her with his arms folded, and he said nothing until she was finished. Then he said, "You have good hands. You don't fight the wood. Most beginners push too hard. You let it tell you where to go." She did not answer. She just nodded because she did not trust her voice. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about her father. She thought about a line in Wendell's last letter. "You have your father's hands, Adeline. I know that even though I never got to see you hold a tool." She worked weekends at Mabel's store, $12 an hour. Stocking shelves, running the register, helping older customers carry things to their trucks. She learned the names of everybody who came in, and she learned which ones needed help, and which ones wanted to be left alone, and she discovered that she liked the work in a way she had never liked any work before. It was honest. The shelves either had soup on them, or they didn't. The register either balanced, or it didn't. There was no pretending. In February, she joined the volunteer fire department. The chief was a woman named Harris in her 50s, hard and direct with a way of speaking that did not waste a single word. Adeline trained every Thursday evening with 8 other volunteers. She learned to check hydrants and roll hose and operate the pump on the engine. She liked the discipline of it. She liked the feel of being part of something that mattered. She liked the way the older volunteers, men in their 60s and 70s, who had been on the department for decades, talked to her not as a teenager, but as a person who had chosen to show up. That was all that mattered to them. That she had shown up. In late March, the curtains went up on the cabin windows. She had sewn them herself from white cotton with a thin blue stripe, bought at a fabric shop 2 towns over. The hems were not perfectly even, and the stitching wandered in places, but they were hers. And when the morning light came through them, It turned the living room soft and warm in a way it had not been before. In early April, she planted a garden. Tomatoes, peppers, beans, lettuce. Mabel gave her seeds from her own garden and told her what would grow in the shallow, rocky soil of the backyard and what would not. Adeline cleared the weeds and turned the soil by hand, the way her grandfather would have done it. She built the stakes from branches she cut off the dead lower limbs of the oak tree. She watered the rows every morning and every evening, and she watched for the first green shoots to come up. And they did. On a Saturday morning in mid-April, she was behind the counter at Mabel's store, restocking the canned goods shelf when the bell over the door rang. She looked up. A girl walked in. She was 16, maybe 17. Thin jacket, one size too small for the cold morning. A backpack slung over one shoulder. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail. She stood just inside the door for a long moment, and she scanned the store the way a person scans a room when they are not sure if they are welcome. Her shoulders were pulled in tight. Her right hand was in her jacket pocket, and she did not take it out. Adeline recognized her at one glance, not the face. She had never seen the girl before in her life. She recognized the way she stood. She recognized the readiness. The tense, narrow readiness of a person who had learned to take up as little space in a room as possible, who was always halfway to the door, who had been told without words for a long time that she was a problem. Somebody else was going to have to solve. The girl walked slowly to the back of the store, and she stood in front of the sandwich cooler. She looked at the prices. She put her hand in her jeans pocket and pulled out a small fold of bills and counted them. She counted them again. She put the bills back in her pocket, and she turned to leave. "Hey," Adeline said. The girl stopped. She did not turn around. "You want a sandwich?" "I don't have enough." "I didn't ask if you had enough. I asked if you wanted one." The girl turned slowly. She looked at Adeline. Her eyes were the eyes of a person trying to figure out where the catch was. "Pick one out," Adeline said. The girl did not move for a long second. Then, very slowly, as if she expected somebody to stop her, she walked back to the cooler. She picked out a turkey sandwich. She brought it to the counter. Adeline took a bottle of water from the small fridge by the register and added it to the sandwich. She rang both items up. She paid for them out of her own pocket, and she pushed them across the counter. "There's a stool back there," Adeline said, "by the window. You can sit and eat if you want. Take as long as you want." The girl looked at the sandwich. She looked at the water. She looked at Adeline. "Why?" "Because somebody did it for me. About 6 months ago." The girl took the sandwich and the water. She walked to the stool by the window. She sat down. She unwrapped the sandwich slowly, as if she did not quite believe it was real, and she ate it in small, careful bites, looking out the window the whole time. Adeline went back to stocking the cans. She did not watch the girl. She did not want her to feel watched. Mabel was at the back of the store, leaning in the doorway to the storeroom with her arms folded. She had been there the whole time. She did not say a word. When the girl finished the sandwich, she folded the wrapper into a neat square and put it in the trash. She walked to the counter. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Adeline pulled a piece of paper from the pad by the register. She wrote a number on it in pencil. She slid it across the counter. "That's my phone," she said. "If you need anything, if you need a place to sit, if you need a sandwich, if you need somebody to call, that's the number." The girl looked at the paper. "You don't know me." "I know. You don't have to do anything about that. Just keep the number." The girl took the paper. She looked at it for a moment. Then she folded it once and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, the small zippered one, the one she had probably learned to put important things in a long time ago. She nodded at Adeline. She walked out. The bell over the door rang behind her. Adeline went back to the canned goods. Mabel came up beside her after a while. She picked up a can of tomato soup and turned it around in her hand thoughtfully, as if she had never seen one before. Wendell would have done the same thing. "I know." Mabel put the can on the shelf. "That's how it works," she said. "Somebody does it for you. You do it for somebody else. It is a small thing. It is not the answer to anything. But it is how a town like this gets to be a town like this." She walked away. That evening, Adeline sat in the rocking chair on the porch. She had bought the chair at the second-hand store in town the week before. Oak worn smooth from years of use by somebody she would never know. It rocked easily on the porch boards, and she liked the way it creaked under her in the cool spring evenings. She had a cup of coffee in her hands. The sun was going down behind the pines. The sky was orange at the bottom, and a deep cold blue at the top, and the first stars were just beginning to come out in the east. The photograph of Calvin Holloway was on the mantel inside, framed now in a small wooden frame she had made in Mr. Whitaker's workshop. Beside it, in a frame she had made the same week, was a photograph her mother had mailed up to her a month ago. It was a picture of Wendell Holloway in a red flannel shirt, sitting in a kitchen chair, with a baby in the crook of his arm. He was looking down at the baby with the closed, careful smile of a man who was holding something more precious to him than he had words for. The baby was Adeline. She was wrapped in a yellow blanket. She had not known the photograph existed. Her mother had mailed it in a box of other things Beverly had kept in a drawer for 15 years and had never been able to throw away. Old pictures, a small pair of baby shoes, a wooden rattle Calvin had whittled by hand for his daughter before she was born. Adeline had set the rattle on the mantel between the two photographs where it caught the light. She had not forgiven her mother. Not all the way. She did not think that was the kind of thing that happened all at once, or maybe ever not completely. But she had stopped refusing the phone calls. They were on a schedule now, Tuesday evenings, 10 minutes 12 sometimes. Beverly had been driving up to a counselor twice a month. She had not asked anything of Adeline. She had only said, "I am working on it. I want you to know I am working on it." Adeline had said, "All right, Mom." And that was where they were. Beverly had asked about the cabin in their last call. She had asked if Adeline had everything she needed. She had asked if there was anything Adeline wanted from the old house. Adeline had said no. She had said she was building her own life now. She had said the cabin was enough. Beverly had been quiet for a long time on the other end of the line, and then she had said, "I am glad, sweetheart. I am glad about that." The sun went all the way down. The pines turned black against the deepening sky. The first crickets started up somewhere out in the backyard, where the garden was coming in. Adeline rocked slowly in the chair on the porch her grandfather had built. She thought about how she had come here. She thought about a black trash bag on a bed at 7 o'clock in the morning. She thought about $34 in her pocket, and 3 nights in the back seat of a Honda Civic. She thought about a phone call from a lawyer she had never met, telling her that a grandfather she had thought was dead had actually been alive the whole time in a town she had never heard of, in a state she had never been to, waiting for her. She thought about the first compartment behind the baseboard. She thought about the music box. She thought about her father's letter, written 1 week before the scaffold collapsed, asking his father to take care of his little girl. She thought about 15 letters stamped, "Return to sender." She thought about a man sitting in a pickup truck across the street from her childhood house, watching her bedroom light go off at the end of the day, and going home and writing her a birthday card he would never be able to send. She thought about Mabel standing in the driveway with her arms folded, about Vernon Briggs stopping his mail truck in the middle of the road, about the man with the clipboard who had not even spoken and whose presence had been enough. She thought about a girl in a thin jacket walking out of Mabel's store with a sandwich and a folded piece of paper in her inside pocket. Every joint in this cabin was a sentence. Every hidden compartment was a chapter. The whole house was a letter written in pine and oak and cedar from a man who had not been allowed to send any other kind of letter to the granddaughter he had loved every single day of his life. She had arrived here with a trash bag and $34 and a photograph in her duffel bag. She had been told for as long as she could remember that nobody on her father's side of the family wanted her, that the only family she had ever had was the one across the kitchen table, that her grandfather had died before she was born, and her father had died in an accident she would never understand, and there was no one else. Every word of it had been a lie. Her grandfather had spent 15 years building a place for her, hiding letters in the walls of it, saving money, one bond at a time, writing birthday cards he knew she might never read, and keeping them anyway because the alternative was giving up. And Wendell Holloway had not been a man who gave up. What he had hidden in the walls of this cabin was proof. Proof that she had been loved her entire life by somebody she had never gotten the chance to know. And that was enough. That was more than enough. It was, in fact, almost too much. But she had carried less for longer, and she could carry this. She finished her coffee. The cup was empty. The stars were thick across the sky now, the way they only got out here, where the nearest street light was 4 miles down a dirt road, and the nearest town was small enough that its lights did not reach this far. She stood up. The rocker rocked a couple of times behind her, and then went still. She went inside. She set the empty mug in the sink. She walked through the living room, past the wooden chair by the fireplace, past the bookshelf she had built, past the mantel with the photographs, and the rattle and the music box sitting where she could see it from anywhere in the room. She paused at the music box. She wound it 3 times. She let it play. The lullaby filled the small cabin slow and gentle, the same tune Wendell had set into the small brass cylinder, some night 15 or 20 years ago at his workbench. She did not know the name of the song. She had never known the name. But she had begun to recognize it now, the way a person recognizes the smell of a kitchen they grew up in. It was hers. It had been made for her. And every time it played, it filled the cabin with something that was not silence, not exactly, but the kind of full quiet that exists in a room where somebody who loves you has just stopped speaking. The mechanism wound down. Adeline stood there for a moment in the dark living room of the cabin her grandfather had built. Then she walked down the small hallway to the bedroom and she turned off the light, and she went to bed, in a place where she finally completely belonged.